Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And want to start off this episode by wishing all of our viewers Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year. Hope you get some time to recharge and relax during this holiday season. Already looking forward to hopefully OOTP 26 coming out sometime in the early stages of next year. That being said, we still hopefully have several more seasons ahead of us with this Oakland A's franchise. It's been a very interesting ride here in OOTP 25. And as spring training gets underway here, as we prepare for the 2040 season, our A's are looking to win a third World Series championship in the past 5 seasons. Feel we've made some good additions to the team over the course of this offseason. As spring training begins, only a couple of players on the injured list. Danny Dakar, may remember him. He was one of our multiple first-round picks back in 2034. The 23-year-old has spent parts of the last 2 seasons in AAA Las Vegas, where he's been a pretty respectable pitcher. The issue is he's had a lot of injuries. Missed most of last year with shoulder inflammation. He was shut down for the season in early May, and he's still going to be out another 2 to 3 months. At this point, looks like he could be a usable major league pitcher in a best case scenario, but certainly does not look like he's going to be a star. In contrast, Chad Evans, who was a second round pick in 2035, has a profile that is somewhat more interesting, but similarly facing some injury issues, recovering from a torn rotator cuff that he suffered back in August of last year. Only pitched 8 games for us in high A ball last year, where he was a solid and respectable pitcher. At 23 years old, would hope that when he is healthy, which hopefully will be sometime in late April, that he can maybe start the season in AA ball and perhaps be in AAA before too long. The issue with Evans, although we have been starting him in the minors when he's been healthy, is that he doesn't have the best stamina in the world, even though he does have a 4-pitch arsenal. So could end up working out of the bullpen, but he's also somebody, if he's actually healthy when we get to the off season and a player development lab period, we could try to improve his stamina as well to turn him into a more proper starter than he is right now with his very limited stamina. But other than Dakar and Evans, the team is generally healthy. You can see we've got 60 players in camp. Hopefully we'll remain healthy over the next month or so. Hopefully we'll have some good results in the development lab, which is going to be very focused, as we always are in these briefer periods during spring training, on some bunting, base stealing, and most prominently some defensive work for our players. Talk about the defensive programs right now. Left fielder Darnell Selvey finished second last year in the Rookie of the Year voting. Going to be working on left field. Chisin Iwata, who we picked up this past off season, going to be trying to learn a new position for him. Luis Godina, Juan Pimentel, Dave Baumler, Steve McIlvain, Chuck Huntley, Mike Blumenshine, Arturo Uresti, Jake Mendick, Nelson Delgado, Amari Alcindor, Devin Carrick, Joe Peterson, and Chad Allred, all among the players who are working on improving their defensive skills. And as I mentioned, there's a handful of other players working on base running and or bunting techniques as well. And as we head into the final stages of spring training, it's been a pretty successful spring so far for the Oakland A's, a 12-10-3 record. Juan Pimentel and Jake Ortega are second and third in the AL in batting. Alejandro Landin tied for the league lead in homers a year after tying for the league lead in home runs with 40. Joe Harmon, who's fighting to just have a roster spot, leading the league in ribbies. Juan Pimentel second in OPS. And Rob Baran, a 4A pitcher who we signed as a minor league free agent, 3 wins thus far. Don't necessarily think that that's going to enable him to make the 26-man roster. Mike Orozco, the setup man, is, or actually more accurately, we've been using him as a stopper. 26 strikeouts working out of the bullpen, just behind our old buddy Jackson Ferris, who is with the Tigers now, signed with the Cubs as a free agent a year ago. Looks like they traded him to the Tigers mid-year, and he's preparing for what could be his first full season with the Tigers. Do have one minor injury to talk about, unfortunately. Daniel Blanco, the excellent reliever, just suffered an oblique strain that's going to keep him out 2 to 3 weeks, so he's likely to miss the start of the season. We have enough depth that not too worried about that, but Blanco is a guy who we signed to a very front-loaded contract, making $7.5 million this upcoming year, which is certainly expensive for a setup man. But those numbers will get much more reasonable going forward and hopefully help us enable to manage this team within the budgetary constraints that we have. But unfortunately, Blanco unlikely to be on the 26-man roster as we head north in about a week and a half. And we ended up losing our last 3 games of the spring to finish 12-13-3. But the primary thing, of course, is to ensure that the team is relatively healthy. And as we think about our 59-man spring training roster now, with Blanco joining Dakar and Evans on the IL, everyone else that we're thinking about as we cut this down to 26 is healthy and well. So that puts us in a pretty good situation to hopefully be starting the season not as strong as we can possibly be with Blanco on the IL, but largely with the team that we would have expected to leave here and head north to Oakland with when spring training began. And we've made the decisions on our 26-man roster that's going to be headed north with us with the injury to Daniel Blanco out of our bullpen that we talked about. Have at least one decision that I think is going to be a little bit of a surprise. Our final cut was Federico Arriola, who is an outstanding prospect, one of the better prospects in all of our organization, one of the better prospects in baseball, ranked 20th overall. As you may remember from the beginning of the offseason, have 2 young pitchers that made their major league debuts in September of last year that we really like, both Federico Arriola and Ernesto Comunez. Comunez was willing to sign a pretty reasonable extension with us, although arguably Arriola is a little bit better. He's still looking for a really big extension in terms of the money. And because of that, we're going to manipulate Arriola's service time a little bit, probably keep him down in AAA for the next month or 2, just so we'll have a little more team control of him if and when we do bring him up. Certainly expect that he's going to be an important pitcher for us for years to come. Did an excellent job with a 1.84 ERA over 7 games when we called him up with Oakland. The 13-7 record in AAA Las Vegas last year, the 6 WAR and the 190 strikeouts were all pretty impressive numbers. The 23 home runs allowed and the 4.55 ERA were not so impressive. I think he probably got a bit unlucky with those home runs, but going to give Arriola a little bit more seasoning before we bring him up at some point in the likely not too distant future, and we'll continue to visit a potential contract extension with him as well. So with Arriola not being on the big club, the starting rotation is probably exactly what you would have expected. Saldana, Dora, Weiss, Baumler, and Blumenschein. The same 5 that we broke with out of spring training last year. Only difference is that Baumler, who was healthy and won 13 games for us last year as a rookie, moved up to the number 4 spot. Blumenshine moves down to the number 5 spot in rotation, the one lefty who had an injury-plagued and relatively ineffective year for us as a starter last season, and also was our worst starter this spring as well with a 10.80 ERA. He could be on a relatively short leash, given that we do have guys like Arriola and Camunez who could certainly start for us. Chuck Huntley back as our closer. Mike Orozco back as our stopper. Lefty Jake Mendick, who we brought on in a trade this offseason, going to be a setup man for us. Another lefty, Kevin Carmichael, who we picked up in a trade a year ago, also a setup man. And then Jonathan Shearer, who had a really nice year for us a year ago, although a bit of a rough spring this year, albeit over only 4 2/3 innings, also going to be a setup man. Camunez, who we talked about, going to be a middle reliever and an emergency starter for us for the time being. But Camunez certainly could be pressuring the likes of Baumler and Blumenshine for the back end of that rotation if they're not performing well. The veteran righty, Alan Hunsaker, who we signed to an extension this past offseason, middle reliever. And then the surprise, given that we sent Arriola down and had the injury to Blanco, is Juan Campos, going to be our long reliever. 4th-round draft pick of ours back in 2032, was once really a prime prospect for us. He has had a lot of injury issues over the years, unfortunately. Missed 4 months with a torn meniscus in 2038. Missed 2 months with a strained forearm last year. Most significantly, he missed 13 months from 2037 into 2038 with a torn flexor tendon in his elbow. But the 26-year-old at this point is out of options, so we are going to give him an opportunity to make his major league debut, hopefully at some point over the next week or so, as we prepare to hopefully have Blanco back in the not-too-distant future. Once Blanco's back and healthy, presumably Campos will be a guy that will either trade away or try to get through waiving and DFAing to get him back down to AAA, but at least want to have a little better sense of what he can do at the major league level before we're forced to make that decision. And as far as the hitters, I think probably the big surprise is that we really are going to only go into the season with one left-handed hitter on the roster. We do have 2 switch hitters with Alejandro Landin and Jake Ortega, so we still should be able to put up pretty good offense against right-handed pitching. But our final 3 cuts were all left-handed hitters. Jonah Richards, the top prospect in our organization, number 10 prospect in baseball, still in theory could use a little bit of seasoning. Started last year in high A ball and only has played 24 games at the AAA level. Certainly looks ready for the majors, but we do see an opportunity for him to continue to improve. And similar to Arriola, he's a guy who's looking for 10 years, over $200 million. So although it's very conceivable that Richards could be playing a critical role for us either behind the plate or at first base or DH by the time we get to the end of this season and hopefully into the playoffs, we are going to manipulate his service time for the time being as well. So we sent down the left-handed hitting Richards, sent down the left-handed hitting Steve McIlvain, who we traded for at the beginning of the offseason. Could see him again in the not-too-distant future. And then we also, last but not least, waived and DFA'd Danny Phelps, the left-handed hitting outfielder that we had picked up in a trade a few years ago with the Red Sox. Hope he makes it through to AAA, but no guarantees that he will. So 3 tough cuts at the end to get to 26 players, but we are still very enthusiastic about what this roster can do. The newcomer Iwata, going to be our second baseman. Last year's Rookie of the Year, Pimentel, going to play third base. We are putting Jake Ortega in a pure DH role to try to keep him healthy. He has played over the last 3 seasons. He's missed over 100 games in 2 of the last 3 seasons. Did play 152 games as a 30-year-old in 2038, and all he did that year was lead the league in WAR for the second time in his career and win his second MVP award. So the goal is to try to keep the franchise's bat in the lineup, and although he's an outstanding defensive player, given his age and given that he's wrecked physically, we're going to DH him for the time being. Darnell Selvey, who finished second in the Rookie of the Year voting to Pimentel last year, is going to be our left fielder. Alejandro Landin led the league in homers last year, going to be our starting shortstop. Arturo Uresti, coming off of 37 homers and 100 ribbies, will be our right fielder. The lone left-handed hitter, Jorge Mendoza, is going to be our catcher, expecting another big offensive season from him. And then we're going to have some platoons at first base and center field, and interestingly, they're all platoons with right-handed hitters. Amari Alcindor and Sergio Palomares are going to be playing first and center field respectively for us against right-handed pitching. And then against left-handed pitching, we're going to go with a couple of righties who had very favorable splits against left-handed pitching. Alcindor and Palomares are basically the same kind of guy against righties and lefties. But Luis Godina, the young first baseman / outfielder, and Joe Harmon, the young outfielder, both are really strong against left-handed pitching, so they're going to get the opportunities at first base and center field, respectively. In the case of Harmon, he was a guy that we would have had to waive in DFA because he's out of options. Harmon, a little bit younger than Danny Phelps and better defensively, so we felt that it made sense to keep Harmon around rather than risking losing him. We'll see whether or not we lose the left-handed hitting Danny Phelps, but as I mentioned, with the other lefties we sent down, McIlvain and Richards, even if we do happen to have someone claim Phelps from us, still feel like we've got some left-handed bats in our organization that are more than major league quality, who can certainly help us if we have some injuries, or just ultimately decide that this somewhat right-handed heavy-hitting lineup against right-handed pitching needs another lefty bat to mix in there with Mendoza, and then the switch hitters Landin and Ortega. So we've got 3 games now to the start of the season. We're going to sim ahead, find out what happened in the development lab before we finish off this episode, and then next time around it will finally be time to play ball in 2040 as we try to guide these A's back to the playoffs and hopefully back into a World Series. And we've made it to opening day. The new top 100 list has been published. Jonah Richards up to number 8 on the list right now. As we talked about, he's probably not going to be down in AAA too long. Taking a look at player development, and we have moved to the number 1 farm system in baseball. That is helped very significantly by the fact that a player we just signed as a free agent out of Japan, Chisen Iwata, is viewed as the 15th ranked prospect in baseball despite his age. As we talked about, we're trying to pivot him to second base and our leadoff hitter. We already talked about Arriola and Comunez. Arriola, like Richards, is going to start the season in AAA. Comunez, now signed to a major league contract, is going to be with the big club. And we've got 5 other top 100 prospects, so 9 top 100 prospects overall. Potential two-way player Mike Homer, going to begin in high A ball. Closer Joe Heilman, promoted to Double A. Closer Wilson Rangel, going to start in AAA. Godina, as we talked about in the majors. And then Jesus Ramos, going to be starting the year in Double A for us, former 8th round draft pick who's looks like he could be developing into a useful starter for us if everything goes well. And before we finish things up, take a quick look at the programs that we had. I won't talk about the no improvement ones. Joe Peterson, young catcher, successfully improved This is a guy who, obviously, with the fact that Richards is one of the top prospects in baseball and one of the top prospects or the top prospect in our organization, may have trouble getting time down the line, but the third round pick from 2038 improved his defense a little bit. Still has a lot of work to do there, but think that he could be a pretty useful backup catcher with some pop for us down the line. Good to see some improvement there. David Palomares, unfortunately, a poor result on base running fundamentals. He's going to be a little more susceptible to leg injuries, so that's clearly disappointing. Jorge Mendoza, the outstanding catcher, doesn't have a lot to improve about, but an outstanding result for those rare situations will have him bunt. Amare Alcindor improves himself at second base. As we mentioned, he's going to be in a platoon for us at first, but a pretty good player. Had a nice debut for us in 2038 in the majors, struggled last year, but certainly with his profile, looks like he could be a starter for many teams, even though he's going to be more of a platoon utility role for us. Nelson Delgado also improved his defense at pitcher. Jake Mendek improved his defense at pitcher. Arturo Uresti, good to see him with some small improvements in his outfield skills. Mike Blumenshine, no improvement. Chuck Huntley improved his defense at pitcher. Steve McIlvain, who we just sent down, some modest improvements, but a good improvement for his arm. He could be back in the not-too-distant future, as we talked about. Successful result from Luis Godina. Good improvements for him. Another guy who's going to be in a platoon situation to start. Chisin Iwata, outstanding result. He learned how to play first base, unfortunately. We played him primarily at second because we think that's going to be his new position, and a little bit at third base in the spring training. But you can see for a guy who was only a shortstop just a month ago, a lot more optionality in terms of his skill set with the time we gave him primarily at second and a little at third in spring training, and then the fact that he had an outstanding result learning first base. Jonah Richards improved his base running a little bit, and Jorge Castillo, young infielder, outstanding result, improving his base stealing techniques. So overall, a fair amount of successful programs that were largely defense-focused. So looking forward to see what this team can do this year. Although we're tied for 27th in budget, player payroll is 19th, which is about as high as we've ever been. Still have a lot of money invested in scouting and player development. So hopeful that we will get this season off to a good start here in 2040. Really excited to see what this team can do. It looks like Phelps did make it through being DFA'd, and Jake Johnson, who was a guy who was plucked from us in the Rule 5 draft last December, has already been returned to us from somebody. Oh, the Rangers, the divisional rival who beat us in the playoffs last year, have already sent the 4A guy Jake Johnson back to us. So we are going to spend some time between now and the next episode fixing our minor league rosters, making some promotions, and probably an occasional demotion or two, depending on how some of the players aged over the course of the season. But looking forward to getting 2040 underway, and we will do that next time around. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.